The silver bombers waited in silence across 3 Pacific islands. Evening light faded over Guam, Saipan, and Tinian on March 9, 1945. Ground crews moved between the massive aircraft like shadows. Final preparations were underway for something unprecedented. Major General Curtis LeMays had made his decision. The commanding officer of the 21st Bomber Command was about to change everything. Traditional bombing had failed. High-altitude precision strikes proved useless against Japanese targets. Weather disrupted formations. The jet stream scattered bombs across miles of empty terrain. Tonight would be different. Completely different. Each Boeing B-29 Superfortress carried a deadly cargo. Bomb bays stretched beyond normal limits. Inside sat cluster bombs packed with M69 incendiary bomblets. Each aircraft held 1,520 of these weapons. Every bomblet contained napalm designed to burn at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The target lay 1,500 miles north. Tokyos Shitamachi district housed 750,000 people. Wooden homes crowded together across just 12 square miles. Narrow alleys separated fragile structures. Extended families lived in buildings that would ignite like matchsticks. At 5:35 p.m., the first bomber lifted from Guam's North Field. 4 Wright R-3350 engines roared to life. The sound echoed across the airfield as more aircraft followed. One after another, 325 bombers took to darkening skies. These were not ordinary missions. LeMays had stripped away defensive guns. Extra fuel and bombs replaced armor and ammunition. The aircraft flew alone rather than in formation. Pathfinder planes would mark targets with burning crosses visible for miles. What happened next would demonstrate American air power's devastating potential. Japanese defenses, despite desperate courage, could not prevent history's most destructive single air raid. The B-29 Superfortress represented America's technological pinnacle. Development required 1.4 million engineering hours. The program cost $3 billion. This exceeded even the Manhattan Project's $1.9 billion budget. Revolutionary features set this bomber apart from all others. Pressurized crew compartments allowed high-altitude flight. Remote-controlled gun turrets provided defensive firepower. The most powerful piston engines ever built drove 4 propellers. Manufacturing spread across the nation. Boeing produced aircraft at Seattle, Renton, and Wichita facilities. The Glenn L. Martin Company assembled bombers in Omaha. Bell Aircraft Corporation operated from Marietta, Georgia. Each aircraft stretched 99 feet in length. Wings spanned 141 feet from tip to tip. 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines generated 2,200 horsepower each. The bomber could carry 20,000 pounds of ordnance. Combat radius reached 1,600 miles. Maximum altitude touched 31,950 feet. Top speed exceeded 357 miles per hour. By March 1945, American factories had delivered approximately 2,000 B-29s to combat units. Production accelerated toward an eventual total of 3,970 aircraft. This manufacturing achievement showcased American industrial might. Boeing's Wichita plant alone produced 4.2 Superfortresses every working day. General Henry "Hap" Arnold personally commanded the 20th Air Force. These strategic bombers first operated from Chinese bases beginning June 1944. Later deployments moved to newly captured Mariana Islands starting November 1944. The 21st Bomber Command operated 3 bombardment wings from the Marianas. The 73rd Bombardment Wing flew from Saipan. The 313th Bombardment Wing also operated from Saipan bases. The 314th Bombardment Wing used Guam airfields. These units could launch over 300 B-29s for single missions. Specialized ground crews maintained each aircraft around the clock. Multiple shifts ensured constant readiness. Japan's air defense system presented a stark contrast. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy operated separately. Minimal communication existed between services. Coordination proved nearly impossible during night raids. The Nakajima J-1N Gecko served as their primary night fighter. Originally designed for reconnaissance, hasty conversion created defensive capability. Twin 20mm Type 99 cannons fired upward at 30-degree angles. Another pair fired downward. This configuration allowed attacks from unexpected directions. However, Japan produced only 479 of these aircraft throughout the entire war. Many had already been lost in previous battles. The Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu provided another night fighter option. A 37mm cannon filled the nose position. Oblique-firing 20mm cannons provided additional armament. Only 1,701 had been manufactured since 1941. Without radar guidance for night interception, these fighters relied on searchlights and visual identification. Finding fast-moving bombers in darkness proved nearly impossible. Ground defenses were equally inadequate. Tokyo possessed fewer than 500 heavy anti-aircraft guns defending the entire metropolitan area. The Type 99 80mm gun provided main high-altitude defense. The Type 98 20mm cannon offered close-range protection with effective ceiling reaching only 11,500 feet. Most critically, Japan lacked fire control radar for anti-aircraft artillery. Optical rangefinders and sound locators replaced electronic guidance. These systems became useless in poor weather or darkness. The numbers revealed a challenging disparity. America could deploy hundreds of B-29s from the Marianas alone. Japanese forces operated perhaps 200 operational night fighters throughout the home islands by March 1945. Fuel shortages restricted pilot training flights. New aviators possessed minimal night flying experience. Aviation gasoline had become so scarce that many aircraft remained grounded. Fuel was preserved for defensive operations against expected American invasion. LeMays had assumed command in January 1945. He inherited a strategic bombing campaign that had failed to achieve decisive results. Previous high-altitude precision raids from 30,000 feet proved ineffective. The jet stream created winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. Bombs scattered miles from intended targets. Engine strain from climbing to altitude with heavy loads caused frequent mechanical failures. Magnesium alloy components overheated beyond safe operating temperatures. Cloud cover obscured targets 70% of the time. Bombardiers relied on primitive radar for target acquisition. After analyzing these operational challenges, LeMays made a revolutionary decision. The new tactics were radical, yet logical. All defensive guns would be removed, except tail positions. Each B-29 could now carry 7 tons of incendiaries instead of 3.5 tons of high explosives. Flying at 5,000 to 9,000 feet would avoid the jet stream. Engine strain would be reduced. Bombing accuracy would improve dramatically. Night attacks would minimize exposure to Japanese fighters. Enemy pilots lacked radar and trained night fighter experience. Individual aircraft would navigate using LORAN radio signals. Attacks would occur in continuous streams over several hours, rather than concentrated formations. Weather forecasters predicted ideal conditions for March 9 to 10. Clear skies were expected with strong surface winds. These winds would spread fires across the target area. Target selection revealed the operation's strategic nature. American planners selected areas where Japanese cottage industries produced aircraft parts, electrical equipment, and precision instruments. Small workshops integrated within residential zones created these components. Intelligence officers consulted maps produced by the Office of Strategic Services. These documents ranked Tokyo's wards by infrastructure density. Pre-war Japanese urban planning documents provided additional information. The selected zone in northeastern Tokyo included Asakusa, Honjo, and Fukagawa wards. These working-class neighborhoods had extremely high population density. Extended families lived in wooden structures separated by narrow alleys. The M69 incendiary bomblet represented advanced warfare technology. This hexagonal steel pipe measured 3 inches in diameter and 20 inches long. Each weapon weighed 6 pounds. Unlike earlier thermite or magnesium designs that burned hotter but could be extinguished, the M69 used napalm. This jellied gasoline was developed by Standard Oil and Harvard University scientists. Clusters of 38 bomblets dropped in E-46 aimable containers. These separated at 2,000 feet altitude. Each M69 deployed a cotton streamer to orient its fuse downward. Upon impact, a time delay fuse burned for 3 to 5 seconds. Then, a white phosphorus charge ignited. This dispersed flaming napalm up to 100 feet in multiple directions. The delayed action ensured the weapon would be lying on its side when it detonated. This maximized the spread of incendiary material through buildings. Testing at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah had proven the M69's effectiveness. Replica Japanese residential structures were built for evaluation. The weapon created multiple ignition points across wide areas. Napalm adhered to surfaces and resisted water-based firefighting efforts. A single B-29 carried 40 cluster bombs containing 1,520 individual bomblets. Of the 325 bombers launched, 279 ultimately reached the target. Operation Meeting House would drop approximately 424,000 incendiary bomblets on Tokyo. This created an unprecedented concentration of incendiary devices. American planners calculated this density would create a self-sustaining conflagration. Separate fires would merge together. Powerful wind currents would spread the inferno beyond the initial impact zone. Brigadier General Thomas S. Power of the 314th Bombardment Wing piloted the first B-29. His aircraft lifted off from Guam just after 5:30 p.m. on March 9th. Over the following hours, bombers departed at 50-second intervals from 3 island bases. The 14-hour round trip would test both men and machines to operational limits. Crews wore lighter flight gear instead of heavy suits. Lower altitude meant warmer temperatures. Without the weight of guns, gunners, and ammunition, the B-29s climbed efficiently. Fuel was conserved during the 1,500-mile journey to Japan. Mount Fuji's snow-capped peak served as a prominent navigation checkpoint as they approached the Japanese coast. Air raid sirens sounded in Tokyo around 10:30 p.m. Most inhabitants initially remained in their homes. Previous high-altitude raids had caused limited damage. Widespread complacency existed among civilians. Tokyo's civil defense preparations proved woefully inadequate. The city had only 18 concrete air raid shelters. These could protect 90,000 people out of 4.3 million residents. Most families relied on bakugu, shallow trenches covered with boards. Simple dugouts offered minimal protection against incendiaries. The city's 8,000 firefighters possessed mainly hand pumps and bucket brigades. These were designed for peacetime emergencies. Neighborhood associations had organized civilian firefighting groups. These consisted primarily of elderly residents, women, and teenagers. Equipment included sand buckets and water containers. The first Pathfinder B-29s arrived over Tokyo at 12:08 a.m. on March 10th. They approached from different directions to mark the target zone. Flying at just 5,000 feet, they dropped M47 napalm bombs. These immediately created visible fire markers forming an enormous burning X. The main force arrived minutes later. Bombardiers aimed for the illuminated markers. Weather conditions proved perfect for the operation. Clear visibility existed with surface winds between 17 and 28 miles per hour. Gusts reached up to 45 miles per hour. As M69 clusters separated and descended, observers described them as metallic objects glinting in the firelight. This sight preceded unprecedented urban destruction. Within minutes, thousands of individual fires erupted across the target zone. Strong winds quickly spread flames from building to building. Separate blazes merged into a massive conflagration. Ground-level temperatures exceeded 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. This was sufficient to melt glass and metal infrastructure. Superheated air created powerful updrafts. Intense wind vortices lifted debris high into the air. Streets became impassable as asphalt ignited. Wooden buildings collapsed from extreme heat. The sound of the inferno overwhelmed all other noise. Smoke and heat reduced visibility to mere feet. 24-year-old Yoshiko Hashimoto was at home in Tokyo's Sumida district with her 13-month-old baby when the attack began. Her husband, an army officer, was on guard duty across the city. She would later provide testimony for historical records. The B-29s were dropping numerous firebombs, and it sounded like heavy rain. I was astounded to see the intensity of the air raid. I had never seen one before. As fires spread rapidly, Yoshiko fled with her parents, baby, and sisters through streets filled with evacuating residents. The narrow alleys of Shitamachi became extremely dangerous. Thousands attempted to escape simultaneously. Parents became separated from children in the confusion. Elderly residents who fell were unable to continue. Firefighting brigades abandoned their equipment when temperatures made it impossible to approach the flames. At the Sumida River, Yoshiko witnessed scenes of chaos. Burning debris was falling around us, and the wind was intensifying. Burning materials, signboards, wooden doors, and household items were airborne. Warehouses on both riverbanks were engulfed in flames. Her father pushed her and the baby into the water. This action saved their lives, but her mother perished along with Yoshiko's father and sister Etsuko. Across the burning district, similar tragedies occurred repeatedly. Those who entered canals faced extreme water temperatures. Others were overwhelmed in the rush as thousands tried to reach water simultaneously. The conflagration's winds were powerful enough to move people significant distances. Some victims were found far from their original locations. Police stations, hospitals, and designated evacuation centers became surrounded by flames. At Kikukawa Elementary School, a designated shelter, investigators later found only metal objects and remains among the ashes. Hundreds had sought safety there. Buddhist temples that had existed for centuries were destroyed along with those who had sought shelter within them. Extreme conditions created by the inferno meant that even those in shelters faced severe challenges from heat and smoke. Superheated air caused severe respiratory damage to those exposed even briefly. Following the raid, casualty estimates varied significantly among different authorities. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey calculated 87,793 fatalities and 40,918 injuries. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department reported 83,793 deaths and 40,918 wounded. The Tokyo Fire Department estimated 97,000 killed and 125,000 wounded. Historical consensus indicates that over 100,000 people died. This exceeded the immediate casualties from either atomic bombing. The attack destroyed 267,171 buildings across 15.8 square miles. This eliminated 25% of Tokyo's structures. Over 1 million survivors lost their homes. The industrial impact was severe. More than half of Tokyo's manufacturing occurred in small workshops within residential areas. Their destruction significantly impacted production of essential war materials. Thousands of skilled workers were lost or displaced from the city. American losses were comparatively minimal. 14 B-29s failed to return, with 96 airmen listed as killed or missing. Several bombers encountered severe turbulence from thermal updrafts created by the fires. This caused loss of control. Others received anti-aircraft damage during their low-level runs. Japanese gunners struggled to track aircraft at such unusual altitudes. Aircrew members later reported detecting smoke even at their operational altitude. Crews who had initially questioned LeMays' tactics were sobered by the operation's scale and impact. General LeMay later reflected on the moral implications. "I suppose if I had lost the war, I would have been tried as a war criminal." General Arnold sent congratulations. "This shows your crews have the guts for anything." The operation's impact immediately influenced American strategy. Within 10 days, similar raids struck Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe. Japan's 4 largest cities were affected. The campaign then paused only because the 21st Bomber Command had exhausted its incendiary bomb supply. Production immediately increased. American factories prioritized M69 manufacturing. The contrast between American and Japanese capabilities had reached maximum disparity. While the United States could replace lost B-29s within weeks, Japan could not rebuild its destroyed urban areas or replace lost workers. American industrial production exceeded Japan's by a factor of 10. Technical advantages made each American weapon significantly more effective. The B-29 program's $3 billion cost exceeded Japan's entire 1945 military budget. While America produced 50,000 tons of incendiary bombs monthly by mid-1945, Japan struggled to maintain basic ammunition supplies. The methodical nature of American operations reflected a scientific approach to warfare. The Chemical Warfare Service had constructed detailed replicas of Japanese neighborhoods at Dugway Proving Ground using pre-war architectural plans. Standard Oil Development Company created napalm through extensive chemical research. Harvard and the University of Chicago contributed analytical studies on fire propagation patterns. This integration of scientific research with military operations contrasted with Japanese military doctrine. Traditional values were emphasized over material considerations. This approach proved inadequate against modern warfare methods. Japan's inability to develop effective countermeasures demonstrated strategic limitations. Despite the February 25th preliminary raid that destroyed 28,000 buildings, authorities made minimal improvements to fire defenses. Proposals to create fire breaks by demolishing buildings were not implemented. Evacuation plans remained largely theoretical. Military authorities insisted civilians maintain their positions, even as intelligence indicated massive incendiary raids were planned. This situation resulted from inter-service coordination failures and leadership constraints. Japanese night fighter forces' limited effectiveness exposed the technical disparity. Pilots like Lieutenant Sakyono achieved individual successes. He was credited with 8 B-29 interceptions. But these were exceptional cases. Most night fighter pilots could not locate targets in darkness, especially once smoke obscured visibility. Without airborne radar, pilots depended on ground controllers using acoustic detection methods. These became ineffective once fires started. The few pilots who intercepted B-29s found their 20mm cannons often insufficient against the bomber's robust construction, unless they achieved critical hits on engines or fuel systems. Some pilots attempted ramming attacks, sacrificing themselves for single bomber kills. Tokyo's fire department exemplified Japan's infrastructural limitations. The city operated 286 fire engines, mostly manual pump units requiring multiple operators. Water pressure was insufficient for large-scale firefighting. Infrastructure damage compromised the water distribution system. Fire department procedures emphasized protecting individual structures through traditional methods. These approaches were inadequate against thousands of simultaneous ignition points. When the conflagration began, most fire companies were overwhelmed rapidly. Their equipment was destroyed and personnel forced to evacuate. The psychological impact on survivors was profound and lasting. Many described feeling that traditional protection systems had failed completely. Refugees departing Tokyo spread accounts throughout Japan. Their experiences contradicted official information about the war situation. Worker attendance at factories declined significantly as civilians lost confidence. The term routine air raid entered common usage as cities were systematically targeted. By August 1945, 66 Japanese cities had experienced major incendiary attacks. Much of urban Japan was severely damaged before the atomic bombings occurred. The operation's success influenced American planning for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. Military planners calculated that continued incendiary raids would eliminate remaining industrial capacity by October. LeMays believed that strategic bombing alone might compel surrender without requiring invasion. Joint Chiefs of Staff estimates indicated that conventional bombing had already caused approximately 900,000 civilian casualties. It would cause millions more if the conflict continued. These assessments influenced President Truman's decision regarding atomic weapons. They were viewed not as alternatives to conventional bombing, but as potentially decisive psychological weapons. The human dimension transcended national boundaries. American air crews carried psychological burdens for years, processing their role in the operation despite wartime context. Richard Bale of the 9th Bombardment Group could observe the fires clearly from his aircraft. This image remained with him permanently. Japanese survivors lived with lasting physical and emotional effects. Families on both sides experienced irreplaceable losses that affected multiple generations. The raid created numerous orphans and widows, overwhelming social support systems and contributing to post-war challenges. Recovery efforts revealed the comprehensive nature of the destruction. Medical facilities in the target area were eliminated along with educational institutions, religious buildings, and administrative centers. The morning of March 10th revealed a transformed landscape. Where eastern Tokyo had existed, only concrete and brick structures remained standing across miles of ash-covered ground. Survivors searched through unrecognizable areas for landmarks that no longer existed. Recovery teams required heavy equipment to clear areas. Many victims could not be identified. Mass funeral services continued for weeks. Waterways remained blocked with debris for extended periods. The industrial impact exceeded initial projections. Tokyo's eastern districts contained thousands of small workshops where families produced specialized components. Precision instruments, electrical components, and mechanical fittings were manufactured in these facilities. Their elimination disrupted supply chains supporting major factories. The loss of experienced craftsmen, machinists, and technical specialists who required years of training proved irreplaceable. Worker productivity at surviving facilities declined as employees dealt with personal losses, housing challenges, and diminished morale. The campaign's expansion proceeded systematically. After replenishing incendiary supplies, operations resumed in May with refined techniques achieving greater efficiency. By July, B-29s were distributing warning leaflets before raids, informing civilians which cities were targeted next. These were psychological operations demonstrating complete air superiority. These missions became routine operations with some encountering minimal opposition. Japanese defensive capabilities progressively weakened as experienced pilots were lost ammunition depleted, and civil defense systems collapsed. International legal considerations remained subjects of historical debate. The 1907 Hague Convention addressed bombardment of undefended cities, but interpretations of defended and military targets proved complex. Post-war tribunals prosecuted certain leaders for civilian targeting, but did not address Allied bombing campaigns. The precedent established that military necessity could justify civilian area impacts. This influenced subsequent international humanitarian law development despite advances in precision weapons technology. Weather conditions' role in amplifying the operation's effects demonstrated American utilization of environmental factors. The March 9–10 raid was deliberately scheduled for predicted strong winds following a dry period. Meteorologists analyzed Japanese weather patterns extensively, identifying optimal conditions for fire spread. The varying wind speeds that night between 17 and 45 miles per hour, depending on location, exceeded some predictions. This integration of meteorological science with military planning exemplified American operational approaches. Individual B-29 crews experienced the mission differently than planners anticipated. Many were affected by observing the scale of destruction below. Aircrew members reported that smoke and atmospheric disturbance were detectable at operational altitudes. Pilots managed aircraft through severe turbulence created by thermal conditions. Some crew members later requested different assignments, struggling to reconcile their participation with personal values. Others focused on the strategic objective of ending the conflict quickly. Japanese military response revealed command and control limitations. Anti-aircraft units engaged continuously but achieved limited success in darkness and smoke. Fighter squadrons launched 90 sorties but accomplished scattered interceptions. Fire department leadership received insufficient warning about the raid's scale. Military authorities prioritized protecting government and military facilities while civilian areas burned. Communications failed as infrastructure was destroyed and messengers could not traverse affected areas. Post-war memorialization reflects evolving historical perspectives. Unlike Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which gained international recognition, Tokyo's firebombing remained less widely known outside Japan. Survivors advocated for decades to have their experiences documented. Katsumoto Sayotome, himself a survivor, established the center of the Tokyo raids and war damages, preserving testimonies that might otherwise have been lost. The challenge of commemorating civilian losses while acknowledging historical context created complex memorial narratives. Contemporary military strategists study Operation Meeting House for insights about air power capabilities and limitations. The raid demonstrated that urban destruction alone doesn't guarantee immediate surrender. Japan continued resistance for 5 more months. It proved that technical advantages can overcome geographic challenges, but showed that distinguishing between military and civilian targets becomes extremely difficult in modern warfare. The evolution from precision to area bombing revealed escalation dynamics in total war. The 21st Bomber Command initially attempted precision strikes following established doctrine. When these proved ineffective, LeMays shifted to area incendiary attacks that were operationally simpler and more impactful. This progression occurred through operational decisions rather than explicit policy changes. By March 1945, urban area attacks had become routine. Target selection was based on population density and industrial distribution rather than specific military installations. Survivor testimonies document lasting trauma. Many experienced persistent psychological effects decades later. Children separated from families often never learned their relatives' fates. Yoshiko Hashimoto's testimony remains in historical archives. The memory of that night never leaves me. My mother, father and sister died while my baby and I survived. I think about them every day. The social structure of working-class Tokyo was fundamentally altered. Extended families dispersed. Traditional businesses were eliminated. Neighborhood networks that had existed for generations disappeared overnight. The ultimate assessment of Operation Meeting House involves its role in ending the war. While historians debate whether strategic bombing alone could have compelled surrender, the raids clearly accelerated Japan's military collapse. The systematic urban destruction created conditions where continued resistance became increasingly difficult. Emperor Hirohito later referenced the bombing campaigns and domestic situation as factors in the surrender decision. The 100,000 who died in Tokyo contributed to ending a conflict that invasion might have prolonged, potentially causing millions more casualties. This calculation provides little comfort to survivors, but influenced strategic decisions. The story of Operation Meeting House illustrates warfare's evolution from limited military engagements to comprehensive societal conflicts. Residential areas built over generations were destroyed in hours by weapons manufactured thousands of miles away. The conflict that began with territorial expansion ended with advanced technology affecting civilian populations who had minimal direct military involvement. The disparity between B-29s carrying sophisticated incendiaries and Japanese defenders equipped with basic firefighting tools illustrated the decisive importance of industrial and technical capabilities. The historical irony remains that this operation's impact was overshadowed by atomic bombings 5 months later. The greater immediate casualties of March 10th became less prominent compared to nuclear weapons' unique nature. This allowed conventional bombing to receive less scrutiny. This historical perspective permitted continued development of conventional area effect weapons and various incendiary weapons in subsequent conflicts without the prohibition associated with nuclear arms. The statistics provide only partial understanding. 325 B-29s launched. 279 reached target. 1,665 tons of incendiaries dropped. 15.8 square miles affected. 267,171 buildings destroyed. 100,000 casualties. 1 million displaced. Behind each number were individuals. American aircrew members executing military orders. Japanese families in residential areas. Children separated from parents. Survivors dealing with profound losses. Operation Meeting House remains history's most destructive air raid. It serves not as a military achievement, but as a sobering reminder about modern warfare's capacity for destruction. Strategic objectives can justify extensive civilian impact. Entire populations become affected by industrial-scale conflict. The flames that consumed eastern Tokyo in March 1945 illuminated the terrible mathematics of total war, where human lives become statistics in strategic calculations, where technological superiority determines survival, where civilians bear the ultimate cost of their nation's conflicts. This single night demonstrated how modern warfare transforms entire cities into battlefields, how scientific precision can create unprecedented destruction, how individual tragedies multiply into historical catastrophes. The survivors who emerged from that inferno carried memories that would never fade. Their testimonies remind us that behind every strategic success lies immeasurable human suffering, that victory and defeat are measured not just in territory gained or lost, but in lives forever changed by forces beyond their control.